I think those days are gone, and there's lots that's positive about that, and there's lots that's kind of scary about it. But you've got to map it against the politics of now, really, which is, that for me is the key thing. Really, what is it that we are? What are the messages that we are helping to travel further, and do they have a value?
Hi there, I'm Mario. Welcome to another episode of Design Interview 10 Questions, where we interview designers from all over the world. Today I'm with Lucienne Roberts, a graphic designer from the UK. She is the curator and designer of Can Graphic Design Save Your Life, a project that really touched me as soon as I heard about it 3 years ago when I met Lucienne in Paris at the AGI conference. So welcome to Design Interview, Lucienne. Great to have you here today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks. If you don't mind, I would start with the initial questions, which is, what made you become a designer?
Well, I mean, I had a head start in a way because my father was a graphic designer and my mum was an illustrator. But so I was brought up in a family of graphic designers, if you like. But bizarrely, I was my kind of act of rebellion, if you like, was that I went to drama school. I didn't go to art school, and I wanted to work in the theatre. And so I studied at drama school for 2 years, and I found it. It was an extraordinary experience. It was a very good experience, which has proven to be very useful, actually, in terms of the work that I do now. But I realised pretty quickly I didn't actually want to go into the theatre. And I remember very clearly my dad saying to me, "Are you sure you don't want to be a designer?" And I was like, "Maybe." And so that's what happened. So I had gone through quite a lot of trying to avoid being a designer in a way initially, just because I didn't want to be like them. And I'm an only child, and so I suppose I thought I should be different to them somehow. And my dad was more of a typographer. My mum was an illustrator, so his influence in a way has ended up being the stronger in some respects, although clearly she's part of the story as well.
And I mean, from your project, Can Graphic Design Save Your Life? It really touched me because in some way, I really think that graphic design can save your life. And is that for you, in general, design something that helps people to save their lives? Or is something...
I suppose the thing is that when I was... the other thing about my parents was that they were quite political. And so they were very much products of the war. And so they talked a lot about what graphic design could achieve. From their point of view, they'd witnessed the difference that design had made during the war years here, but also actually afterwards with the Festival of Britain and so on. And they were great, believers really in what design could do socially. And then I was born in the 1960s, which was a time of great kind of design optimism, And so what I did carry from them very strongly and has impacted on all my work was this idea that design had some social value, that was the point of doing it, actually. And when I left college, a lot of the work that I did initially was in relation to health. So I was a design consultant for a breast cancer charity, for example, and they were trying to raise funds for research, and I was their external consultant. So I was working on campaigns for them, and I developed their brand and all that kind of stuff. And that really felt to me to be very valuable work. But at the time, it wasn't the kind of work that was applauded particularly. Actually, I just quietly got on with it. But the design that got lots of attention was way more experimental, particularly in terms of typography. And but I really believed in what I was doing, and then I ended up doing quite a lot of work for the Wellcome collection, which is where our exhibition Can Graphic Design Save Your Life was held. And their research, the Wellcome fund a lot of medical research, and they also have these 2 gallery spaces. And all the idea behind the galleries is that they're to help the public understand more about issues to do with health. And I'd done, myself and my colleagues at the studio had worked on a few exhibitions, one about mental health, another about the brain, so we'd worked with the Wellcome a lot. And then when it just seemed such an obvious thing to go to them and say, actually, why don't you do an exhibition about graphic design and health? Because graphic design clearly has an important role to play. And the Wellcome have a fantastic archive, they have a fantastic library. The Henry Wellcome, whose money is behind the Wellcome collection, collected all manner of things to do with medicine and health. And lots of them actually were bits of ephemera and packaging and all sorts of things. So they had a great resource that we could draw on. They had a fantastic relationship with the Science Museum, so we could go and look in their archives as well. And it just seemed a perfect combination of my studio experience and interest in health and them as a client, and turning it into a sort of our own project. And of course, it was great because at that point I'd set up Graphic Design And, which is our publishing research organisation. It's kind of sister organisation, which I set up with co-founded with my collaborator, friend Rebecca Wright, who's a dean at Central St Martin's. And we'd come up with this idea that we wanted to just do projects that were about graphic design in relation to other subjects. So to do graphic design and health was fantastic, and it pulled together her interest, my studio's experience, and so on. And it's probably the project that I'm most proud of, actually. And it was conceived to be accessible to a non-design audience. I mean, we love the fact that designers came, of course, but because it was at the Wellcome, which is a much more a public space, we got about 100,000 visitors came, which, to us that was fantastic, because it really meant that the general public were coming to some awareness of what graphic design was and what it does and what it can achieve, So it was really, in many respects, as I say, it's probably my favourite project.
Yeah, I mean, I think today design in general, also especially product design, goes really close with like also medicine. If we just think like the prostheses, for arms and so on. So these 2 fields really work together somehow, and I think it's something that is really important actually. And
absolutely.
What is design? I mean, what is design? Sorry, what do you create as a designer then?
We do. It's interesting that we're redoing our website at the moment. So that means that you trawl through. In fact, we've never had a proper website, so we're trying to do a proper website. And you trawl through all your work. And of course, it's really interesting because I've been doing this for quite a long time now. That the work that you actually feel that you want to show and what you're most proud of and what you feel is you'd like to do more of. And really, it comes down to exhibition design, which is where the theatre thing comes in, I think. That we've worked more and more and more in exhibition design, and there's such a wonderful marriage of the 3D and the 2D, and they're experiential. They're often about employing narrative, all sorts of things that are sort of stretch us and difficult, because we're having to often learn quickly about subjects that we don't know anything about. But they're just fantastic, very focused and intense projects. So they're great. So exhibitions and books, really. I still absolutely love books. And when if I'm asked to cite the sort of. It's interesting being at home, because I've been going through my book collection and I think, gosh, if there were a fire, which books would I take? It's that kind of thing. It's that one, that one, that one, that one. Your favourite books, and so I guess really in my heart, that's what I am, an exhibition and book designer. Although that doesn't mean that we haven't done lots of other things, because we have.
But I mean, it's a different topic. But have you ever asked yourself why all, especially graphic designers, are collectors of books?
Yeah, I think it's because most of our work ends up in the bin, and books are they generally don't. Generally, they have a longer life, and also because the turning of the page, you've got opportunities for surprise all the way through. You've got different ways in. The format can change, the way they're printed. There's so much variety within this one amazing object. But I think more than anything, they're precious. We still think of them as precious, and actually they've become more precious because of technology, I think, because they are we know, using print inventively, that books can do things that can't be done on screen. So that plays to our strengths. Actually, it's fantastic. But I think it's really because books last. That's why we love them.
Well, going back to the previous arguments, how everything started with your partner, Rebecca Wright, is something that started like naturally, like talking at the bar, something like this, or were
we were working on a book for Lawrence King called Design Diaries, and we had gone to Amsterdam to interview Experimental Jet Set for the book, and the book was about the design process, and we ended up, and it was very wet, and it was raining a lot, and so we had lots of cups of coffee, and we were in the Stedelijk Museum chatting, and we both share a love of books and literature, and we were talking about how we really would love to start a publishing imprint, and that's when it all started. That we were both saying, what makes graphics interesting is really everything else. It's graphics in and of itself. That's navel gazing, and that has an interest. But really, for us, it was always about how graphic design is in everything else. It connects everything else, and that's what we wanted to explore. And then we discovered this thing called the Bliss system, which is like a library classification system. And most libraries don't use this; they use the Dewey system. But the Bliss system was developed by a chap called Henry Bliss, who was a librarian in New York. And we loved the fact it was called the Bliss system, because what a lovely name, Bliss. And what was interesting was that he wanted to find a way of categorizing books so the same book could be put in more than one place. And that really suited our idea. So all of our projects, they can either go into graphic design, or they can go into health or maths or literature or whatever else it is that our book happens to be about. So once we discovered the Bliss system, it gave us a structure, which was fabulous. So we thought we'd work through the sort of top level Bliss categories. Obviously there are many, many Bliss categories, but the top level are, literature and maths and physics and chemistry and, what you'd imagine. So we're trying to work through those.
Well, that's very interesting. You mentioned in general the process, but when you design a new project, are you interested in a specific process while you are designing, or every time like you act like free, I don't know, following intuitions or something like this? Also because, I have the impression, looking at your works, that I don't know, for me, your works, like the colors, especially that you use, I could not expect somehow. I don't know.
I love colour. Colour is a big, big thing for me. I suppose when there's a big difference between the graphic design and projects, because effectively we are our own client, apart from when we've done the exhibitions, and then of course there's proper client. But in terms of studio projects, when there are definitely clients, the process is it's interesting because of course you have to always be you're given a brief and that's what you're responding to. And I think we're quite respectful of our clients' needs, and we're very respectful of inclusivity, actually, particularly in the exhibition realm, that you're trying to make something accessible to people, and quite often people who don't, you're trying to make it engaging and attractive and easy for them to understand, particularly when we do work for museums like the Science Museum family of museums here we've done a lot of work for example. And every project for them has an educational bent, really. So I think we're very used to constraints, working within those constraints. But having said that, I do think our work on the whole, we try and use, we try to produce something that's simple but impactful. And I think our work's quite strong, actually. I sometimes look at the work and think, why aren't we producing work that's more subtle? But it's just kind of not who we are in some respects, I suppose. And although we do sometimes, clearly, but we absolutely love colour, certainly. Colour as a way of lifting a project and engaging people and enlivening and doing something a little quirky. We often use a lot of lettering, large-scale lettering, be that, painted on the wall or moulded out of perspex, or, but it's often three-dimensional. And that's another thing that we love doing because we love words. So we love playing with words and letter forms. And I guess that the other thing is about narrative, that we're very interested in structure. So that might be the structure of a page. I've always been fascinated by numbers and grids and, exactly who you'd expect, all the Swiss modernists and so on. So numbers have always been important to me. But so has the abstract, the structure in terms of abstract form and how to employ those devices, but in a useful but beautiful way. But a lot of it was funny. I was looking, because of talking to you, I was looking at my sketchbooks, and I was interested that you just spoke to Michael, because his sketchbooks are proper graphic design sketchbooks, because there's loads of drawings, and mine are nearly all words. They're kind of try that, and they're not, so a lot of it is language based for me, an awful lot.
Yeah, but I mean, for me, it makes sense also because, for example, thinking like what Eric Brandt said in his interview, that he thinks that he used typography, especially because he lived in different countries and he knows different languages. So languages, so letters, so typography is kind of something natural for him to express in that way.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's funny that Dad was a typographer, but that I didn't. It wasn't until I went to college that I actually understood what typography was. So even though in his studio there were type sheets around and there were depth scales and this was when people were pasting up artwork, so it was all of that. I'd often say, what is a typographer? And it blank, I just didn't get it at all, which is really funny. And then when I went to college, I remember we did an exercise which involved a very big letter form. And I suddenly thought, wow, that's really beautiful. It was like, ta-da! It suddenly hit, I suddenly got it.
You said your father was a typesetter and your mother an illustrator. And you also you comes from a previous generation. And today, you can see on Instagram, for example, contemporary young designers that are like, uploading stuff every second, million of stuff. And also because for you, design has a deep meaning. How do you feel about just seeing contemporary design today?
It's a bit the quantity is quite overwhelming, I think, and I do think a lot of it. Clearly, until it's applied, what's interesting is that design forms that look like graphic design can be self-initiated, or they can be used to respond to a brief, but the process is entirely different, actually, and as you say, because I take it all quite seriously, I suppose. I'm interested from a zeitgeist, semiotics, all that point of view, what current work is telling us about our world, but also very aware of people talk a lot about bubbles, don't they, at the moment, and that there are sort of design bubbles, and I don't know how much any of that work actually connects with the average person, and therefore what difference it makes beyond within the design community, which doesn't mean it doesn't have a value, of course, but I feel quite conflicted, I suppose, and I'm very aware that, you can like something because of its aesthetics, but you may not like its meaning, and it maybe takes a bit longer to consider that sometimes. And also I wonder, some of your questions are about the future of graphics, and I see it as something that has immense value, but is also in jeopardy in some ways, in that it's easy for people to be their own designer now. So I have no idea how trained designers in the future will make a living. And I'm sorry, sorry. Can you just stop for a minute, because I need to re-plug in. So we were talking about meaning, weren't we? And actually the vulnerability of for graphic designers now. I suppose I feel conflicted on many levels. So one is that I'm very interested in what's happening to the climate, and it seems to me that graphic designers inadvertently have contributed to the problem, in that we make lots and lots and lots of things look desirable. We have played, and we've done it in a way where we've applauded a piece of design in an aesthetic sense and not asked any questions about what happens to it later, really what its role is in society, and so on. And now I think we're being forced to think about some of those things, and therefore I have no idea what that means for our business. Whether there will be less graphic design, whether there'll be the same quantity of graphic design, but it will be produced for different sorts of causes, whether therefore the money won't be there to pay people to make it. These are all really profound questions, it seems to me, but they are questions that I think we are beginning to consider and think about. And so the future of what we do, I think, is up for grabs, really. It's uncertain, shall we say? I think it's very uncertain.
And you started in an era where internet was not here, and today internet had a huge impact. Not today, a few years ago, but especially today, it still has a huge impact on design. How do you feel it? What's your opinion about the impact of internet had on design?
Well, I suppose, because I come at it from a political angle, one of the things that really struck me, we another exhibition that we curated and then the studio designed was called Hope to Nope, and it was at the Design Museum, and it looked at graphics and politics in from 2008 to 2018. And what was very clear over that period was how the impact actually of digital communication and graphics within that realm, and how dangerous it was, because so much of it is uncharted. It's not, when you look at a lot of the material that's whizzing about in the ether, you often don't know who's made it. You don't know what their agenda is. But it all looks like proper bona fide graphic design. Which makes it very, very dangerous. And so that angle, in terms of technology, really frightens me quite a lot, really, because I don't know how any of this will be policed. I wonder whether in the end it means that it will be policed, properly, and there'll be censorship in the way that there is in other areas of life. But then at the same time, there are some, we're at the foothills, really, of understanding what we might end up doing, what designers of the future or younger designers might end up doing, because the movement and graphic design, for example, wasn't something that was that commonplace when I was young. On the whole, that's not to say that there weren't designers, of course, even in the very early days, thinking about how to animate letter forms, but it wasn't something that most of us had to think about. And now one does, and there are wonderful possibilities because of that. There's the possibility to explore and make a much more diverse set of things, if you like, and also there's, I guess, it goes hand in hand with the sort of not having a job for life, doesn't it? That you can morph into something else, you can become somebody else professionally, which is a great thing. That's a really exciting thing. That's a wonderful thing. But when I think about, I signed, there was a manifesto produced in the 1960s by the designer Ken Garland called First Things First, and it was reissued in 2000, and I was one of the signatories. And at the time when he did it in the 60s, he was kind of arguing for designers to be more useful, really, and not put their skills to, the selling of products that we often don't actually need. And that was kind of something I adhered to. Whereas I think there are lots of designers who are not doing that. They're not promoting things that we don't really need. They're often generating work that's much more experimental, actually, and it's more akin to our art form, really. And that's interesting. That tells us something about our time too, I think. But in terms of conventional graphic design, being a graphic designer, in the way that somebody like my dad was, he started off as a graphic designer, he died as a graphic designer, and he would have recognised the kind of work I was doing at that point when he died. I think those days are gone, and there's lots that's positive about that, and there's lots that's kind of scary about it. But you've got to map it against the politics of now, really, which is, that for me is the key thing. Really, what is it that we are? What are the messages that we are helping to travel further, and do they have a value?
And your partner is Rebecca, right? And if I'm not wrong, she's the Dean of the Center of Some Artists, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think about design education? Also, because you're really close to her, so you probably talk about that.
Well, obviously, from my point of view, it's hugely gratifying that I get asked to speak a lot more now, and mainly about politics. So that means that there are younger designers who are properly engaged and interested in what they can use their skills to support, how they can make the world better, basically. Which that's really gratifying, because I don't think that was the case when I was a student, to be honest, on the whole, and not for some time afterwards either. And so I find that very positive, and I find I think design education has changed so much, really, in that, again, because there were fewer courses, fewer students when I was studying, the chances were quite high that you would end up being a graphic designer. And you'd either work in a studio or set up on your own or whatever. Whereas that can't be the case now, because there are so many more graduates, and I don't think there's infinitely huge need within the industry for all of those designers. So clearly those skills have to be considered as transferable skills, and there's no denying that kind of working through design problems, and people talk about design as problem solving, don't they? And really that's a lot of what you're learning at college, is how to be analytical, how to research, how to draw from multiple influences to communicate ideas visually. But that could take you in all sorts of directions, and that's an exciting thing. In terms of my role in education, something I'm doing at the moment, which is terrifying but really interesting, is that I am teaching at Southampton in the engineering department. So I'm not teaching design students, I'm teaching engineering students, and I've just started this, actually. In fact, just before we spoke, I was researching for some lectures, because, and this to me is really fascinating. The one one of my remits, I've got two roles, if you like. One is that the staff there define engineering as a design discipline. And by that, they mean that, it involves planning, it involves foresight, it involves problem solving, it involves a lot of the things that actually as designers we do too. But a lot of the students don't think about, they think design is about what it looks like, not the process. So that's part of why I'm there, is to try and open up for the students what we mean by the term design. So I'm not just talking about graphics at all. I'm going to be looking at fashion, product design, architecture, everything. And then also they feel that their students are not well enough equipped to communicate their ideas visually. And again, of course, that's where I come in, is to try and open up for them different ways of thinking about how to communicate the value of what engineers do. And actually, in many respects, here, this is a great example, isn't it, of diversifying and how, design skills take you on all sorts of journeys that you would never have imagined, because I would never have thought that I would be teaching engineering students as opposed to design students. But it's a real challenge, because these are all they're mathematicians and they're kids who've done brilliantly at physics at school. So they will give me a run for my money, if you like, because I think they'll be very challenging in many respects. But equally, I come with knowledge and experience that they have. The education system tends to silo people into science or art still, even though that's not a good thing really. And so we're meeting each other, and it's kind of, well, okay, what's going to happen here? And I will learn as much from them, I suspect, as they will hopefully learn from me. But it's quite it's great, because it's a bit like curating our exhibitions, actually, that at the moment I'm researching case studies to talk to them about, that might include, I might one minute be talking about someone like Leonardo, for example, who you could say was as much an engineer as an artist, and the next minute talking about the Brompton bike, or, so it's going to be really, really stimulating for me, I think, because it means I'm moving out from the world of graphic design, and I think that's really good, because I do think sometimes I like all graphic designers can be a little bit too, in my own zone.
And do you think the designer in general in the future will be a broader role in the society?
Well, I mean, that's a really good question, because in a way, that's a bit like being, I don't know, if you think about the Eameses, that's what they were like, weren't they? I mean, they were architects one minute, experimenting with materials the next, doing some doing a game, and that would be a bit of a dream, really. And I think to have the confidence as well, actually, to say, right, okay, I think I'm going to do some ceramic tiles today, or whatever, would be fabulous. And actually, that's the best. Maybe moving. It's a really interesting question, because I hadn't really thought about it. But maybe for me, doing this teaching is I'm perhaps on a journey where I don't move away from graphics exactly, but open up what I think of as graphics, and the value of what graphic design is, and that's a good thing, and I'm sure it would be for others too, really.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting, because I was thinking, like, at the beginning the designer was started like an architect. Usually, I mean, graphic designer were architects somehow, and then they split into designers and architects, and then the designer, product designer, graphic designer, and then the graphic designer became the web designer, type designer, graphic designer today. But I have the feeling like now is going back, and the designer is not just a graphic designer, but wants to be more, and not just related to graphic. So I think, maybe
it's what you were saying about technology, isn't it? That because a lot of people can produce their own graphic design, and it's not as it might not be, it's not going to be pushing the boundaries or anything, but necessarily. but it'd be perfectly acceptable. It's inevitable that we're going to be morphing into something else, isn't it, really? And actually, even though I say that what I've done would have been was recognisable to my dad, he would say, I think, that the nature of the business had changed quite a lot in his lifetime, really, in that I think he thought I had access to all sorts of things that he didn't. I had more freedom than he had, and so on. So, it's always changing, really, I guess. But clearly the technology is a huge thing now. I mean, I think that's the other thing, is I think we miss the physicality of things, and so making some ceramic tiles would be lovely because it's a tangible thing, and that's the same with books, isn't it? That's why we love books, of course, because we can hold them and touch them, and they're tactile, and there's only sometimes the screens can be a bit much, can't they? Screens all the time can be a bit much.
We arrived to the last question, but I think it's really interesting to ask you. Do you think the designer can do something in this moment for this global pandemic of course, not medically, but maybe we can do something to fight this invisible enemy?
Well, I mean, clearly, messaging is hugely important, and actually that is interesting here because there was quite a lot written a couple of weeks ago, about how there was no evidence of proper government information. That's changed, but I presume that's partly because everything was moving so quickly. But of course, that's something that we can, as graphic designers, we can be involved with. But actually, the other thing that I think is quite touching is that you can see that designers want to do something, can't you? You can see that Morag Myerscough did a fantastic billboard about the NHS, and she's done these. I think you can print them out. That you colour them in and stick them up in your window. So that she, like other designers, is trying to come up with different ways of producing messages they might be messages of thanks or messages of hope. They don't have to be directly information about the disease. That's a lot of what design can do. It can lift your spirits. It can make you want to get up in the morning. It can make you feel safer. It can make you feel moved. It can make you feel sad, of course. It can make you feel, that's a lot of what's amazing about what we can do. And Fraser Muggeridge did a great poster with the artist Jeremy Deller about immigration. It just said, thank God for immigrants, because especially here, given what's been happening with Brexit and so on, which you might know, that's our recent book is about Brexit. It's absolutely the right message, because the NHS would be, so many of our nurses and doctors were not born in the UK, and so it was a very clear message. It's powerful. It's absolutely right and important that those messages get out there, and that's what designers can help do. But then also in the end, we can just go shopping for our elderly next door neighbour or whatever. Those things are equally important, of course, if not more so sometimes.
Well, thank you very much, Lucienne. It was really nice to talk to you. Thank you again.
Pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. And good luck.